Okay, so Camel K. I'm going to talk a little bit about Camel K. So what is it? So Camel K is basically an integration platform that runs solely and purely on Openshift and or Kubernetes platforms. It also supports serverless type workloads as well, and I'll show you this a little bit later on. I'm hoping, if time permits, I'll get time for a quick demo at the end as well, so I'll quickly show you. It's based on an architecture around Kubernetes custom resource definitions and operators, and the whole idea of that is to make the user experience easy, basically, so a developer doesn't really have to care about the fact that it's running on a Kubernetes or OpenShift platform. The operator and the CRD does all of that work for them. As always with anything Red Hat, it's a community-driven project. It's part of the Apache Camel project. So if you go look in there, you can find lots more information about it. And it became part of that sort of back in the summer 2018. And at Red Hat, we're pretty close now to actually releasing it as an enterprise part of our integration solution. So often there's a bit of a chicken and egg here. So Phil's here talking about Camel K, but Camel K is based on Apache Camel, so often I have to take a step back, and I haven't got ages to talk about this today, but Apache Camel is an integration platform. As an integration platform, it has many different types of connectors to many different types of applications, whether those be very technical or whether they be sort of SaaS-based applications like Salesforce, for instance. And we can pretty much, even if we don't have a connector, we can pretty much connect Camel to anything, albeit we do have over 300 connectors these days, so there's a lot of things that we integrate with out of the box. It can run, as I'm going to show you, on OpenShift Kubernetes. It can run off of that platform, of course, as well, so it can run just in Java hotspot, running on standalone VMs or whatever it may be as well. Camel is all based around a concept called enterprise integration patterns, and these are typical things that a developer would need to do when doing integration. So that would be things like split messages, root messages, transform messages, be able to handle exceptions, error hospitals, all of those type of things that are important and relevant when we're doing integration. And so the Camel framework is really trying to make those type of things easy for me, meaning that I don't need to do lots of code and lots of work to do that. The way we express our integrations is in the form of a domain-specific language, and we support things like XML for that. We support YAML-based DSLs, and also we support Java-based DSLs, and there are more. And those DSLs are then sort of picked up by the operator and deployed into the platform that we want to use. So the style that we use for building Camel K applications it is really around a sort of serverless based style, if you like. So if you think of deploying a function into something, a Lambda function or something like that, we don't really give two hoots about what that platform is, how it's going to look when it executes, how it gets deployed, all of those good things. All I really do is I write my source code, in my case, an integration, a camel root, as we call it. I then tell that to execute on the platform, and the platform then performs its magic and does the rest for me. So for me, I literally create an integration file, so a Java file, a YAML file, Groovy, XML, whichever format I've chosen. I then execute that with my CLI, and then OpenShift or Kubernetes takes over and does the rest for me. So it really streamlines the process of actually creating and deploying integrations into an OpenShift Kubernetes platform. The architecture of Camel K, as I said already, is all based around operator. So what does that command line actually sort of do for me? So when I run, when I type, I should say, camel run integration.java or whatever that's called, what that actually does is behind the scenes creates me an integration custom resource. And of course, if you know anything about operators, you'll know that the specific operator is sat there listening for these resources being deployed to the cluster and managing the state of them. So if it's deployed for the first time, then it knows that it's not deployed and it needs to go and build images. It needs to create all the resources it needs. It needs to do everything to actually be able to get that application working. And so having done that, it will then actually deploy the integration to there. So my currency, if you like, that I'm actually moving through my application and my integrations and my environments is actually my integration custom resource. as opposed to a container image or anything like that. We rely on the operator to do those things for me. And so we're sort of following the serverless based approach. And the serverless approach here is really the developer doesn't really care or know about how that platform works, how that platform operates. I give it my code and then it does the rest of the work for me behind the scenes. So what the operator then does once it sees a custom resource definition, I won't go through all of these in detail, but if you know anything about deploying applications to platforms like Openshift, you'll know there's a whole ton of stuff that actually goes with the applications. And that could be everything from configuration maps to services, to routes to be able to talk to those things outside of the cluster, creation of the containers and everything else that goes along with that. What the Camel K operator does, it automates that for me and takes guesses as it goes, educated guesses as well. So if I've deployed my integration, it will pull the dependencies, for example, or take a guess at trying to pull the dependencies that thing needs. If I'm deploying to a platform that has Knative serverless installed, it will automatically default to deploying in a serverless based fashion, for example. But of course, I can override all of these as well if I choose to at deployment time. So we're very much following this sort of code-driven serverless approach here. So I literally, as we see in the middle there, write my integration. So I've got a simple REST DSL there, a REST-based function listening on netty at any address at 8080. I then do my business logic. And in this case, what I'm actually going to be doing is sending messages across Knative eventing into a particular channel. And then what happens behind the scenes is that operator does everything for me. So at the bottom, it's pulling all of the things that I need to be able to use to deploy this application. It's then creating things like all of the containers, the JVM configuration and everything else it needs to execute. It's then integrating with the environment and everything else that sits around that as well. So things like channels, brokers, Kafka, if that's there, and even API management technologies like 3Scale. And then on the top, we sort of use and abuse the platform that we're running on as well. So as I said, if serverless is there, we go Knative. If I run a timer inside of my integrations, then that timer gets converted into a Kubernetes cron job, for example, as that deploys as well. So we really sort of understand in Camel K the environment and the platform that we're executing in, and then we deploy the integration accordingly, basically, and that's it in a sort of simple term. What we also do is try to make the developer's user experience very easy in terms of this deployment as well. So if I can just run an integration file and then have the operator do the rest of the work for me, that needs to continue past that first execution, basically. So if I then modify that integration, so through my development lifecycle, then what I need it to be able to do is very quickly modify the execution in the runtime for me. And again, anybody that knows sort of container-based development will know that's often going around creating container versions before you get to a point of deploying it and executing it. With Camel, and I'll show you this if I've got time, I'll show you real quickly how I can do this in seconds without even having to redeploy a container. However, that said, I often can add things to my integration that does require a new version of the container to be deployed. So if I add a new dependency, for example, into my integration, then what I need to do is create a new image for that. And the way we actually do that is by using the layering within the images. So rather than having to build a whole new image, we add a new layer to the image with the new dependency, in this case, that we've actually added to the application. So again, making deployment very, very quick and very smooth for a developer to actually use. So if you've heard me talk before, you'll probably heard me talk about Caucus. If you haven't, you will hear me talk about it again in the future, I'm sure. Camel K can run on Caucus, so it can basically get all the benefits of Caucus in terms of lightning fast, quick startup times and low sort of memory usage. So that's a really cool thing to be able to do. And again, by default, Camel K will go for Caucus, but as I'm showing on the bottom of the screen there, I can actually turn it on or turn it off depending on what I want to do. So I can override these things. We also are already, even though we've not sort of released, we're at an enterprise class stage, I would call it. So we've also thought a lot about monitoring and tracing. So we do things like open tracing for tracing through my integrations that I've got deployed. And again, we do a lot of stuff here with Jaeger around that. We can also do Prometheus for exporting of all of our metrics as well. And all of this is done, again, by the operator for me. I'm not having to do anything to get this stuff out of the product. So that's a real quick whistle stop of Camel K. So from a developer's point of view, it just makes my life easy. I just focus on writing the integration. I don't have to worry about the platform or where it deploys. And again, from a sort of architecture point of view, it means that we get something that's very flexible. It's very cool on its resource optimization with things like Caucus usage. And what it also means is that I can get sort of real-time access into things like metrics and tracing and all of that good stuff as well. So without further ado, what I want to do is just, and I think I've given myself time, which is cool. I just want to quickly show you Camel K in action. And so what I've got is a little API. And so just to show you that API, in Red Hat integration and deployed to my cluster, we have a visual API designer that will create me nice open API definitions. And so here, this is the actual API that we're going to execute on Openshift, actually, in a few moments. So it's basically the API is going to go off to Amazon S3, and it's going to pull back all of my data, basically, that's stored on all of my files that's stored on S3 for me. So what it has is just a slash as an option in here. And slash will, if I just call URL slash, it will get me everything that sits in my S3 bucket. If I do a key, so if I pass an S3 key across, if I do a get, it will pass me back that object. If I do a put, it will store the object. And if I do a delete, it will delete the object. So no massive rocket science here. But if you see, and here I'm defining things like the format of the data. So here we've got an octet stream coming in and all of that good stuff. So I just wanted to show you that real quick. It makes it, one final thing I wanted to show you. So in here, all of these things have an operation ID. So here we've got on get, it's called get, not use much imagination. Put is called create, and delete is called delete, and slash is called list. And that's important. I'll show you that in a second. And so ultimately what I end up creating is an open API document that I can then use to implement my APIs. This is proper top-down design using sort of Camel K. So what I'm going to do now is jump straight over to my editor. And what we've now got is I've pulled that YAML, and that YAML is here, actually in my code. And within here, all I need to do for people that know a little bit about Camel will know the concept of a route. So this is a route. This is a route, this is a route, and this is a route. And what they do is they map directly to those operation IDs that we saw in the Open API document. So I've got a list, a get, a create, and a delete. And up here, I've bound in basically the YAML file into my code, so it gets deployed at the same time. So that's my integration. I'm not going to talk about it in great detail, but we can see list here. What we're doing is going off to S3. We're getting the data. What I'm doing is I'm storing all the properties, so the keys and all that stuff, in a secret that's sitting in my OpenShift environment. So I don't need to do anything about that. That's all taken care of for me. And then just a simple transform, splitting my data and throwing it out as a JSON document, basically. And you'll see similar things for the other ones. So all I want to do is run this for you. So it's really just showing you the experience that I have. So if we just pop across to OpenShift, we can see there's nothing there at the moment in my cluster. And all I need to do is run this thing. So I can just do camel run, as I was talking about before. But also we have a lovely integration into VS Code. So if I right click, I can actually start my integration here. And I can choose to run it in developer mode, what we call basic, and some other modes as well. And again, maybe I can talk about these another time. Developer mode is an interesting one. So I'll just run this in developer mode. And what we can see is it's actually going through the process of deploying the application now. And what I can actually see are Camel K integrations that are currently deployed on the cluster. And if I flip back here, we can actually see, because this is running in an OpenShift cluster that has Knative serving inside it, it's actually deployed as a Knative service represented by the KSVC here. And we can see that from nothing to deployment, that was, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 seconds to actually get that thing up and running. So I can actually now just test that out and use it. And so I've just got again, for ease of use, a couple of curls here. So if I just do curl on that, what we'll see is that will execute, and let's just put a JQ on it. So that's doing an integration to S3, and we can see the data coming back. What I can do is add data in. So I could do add in, let's hide that out of the way. Oopsie. Let's add a record in. Missed the C. An Earl, not a curl. Add the data in, and that's added the data in, and we can see that it's actually read out and passed back via the API call, the actual content of the record, the file, and the file is this integration. So if I then just flip back to S3, refresh on here, I should see something called example that's in there. So examples there and added. And then again, what I've got here is the ability to delete as well. So real quickly, just showing this guy in action. Now, if I take my time, and I haven't really got time to take my time, so I won't, what we will see if I don't use this API for a period of time, then it will actually shut down because it's running as a Knative service. And if I just refresh that, we should see that that's changed now. Just the other thing that I wanted to quickly introduce about Camel K is ease of change. So that guy is actually executing. And what I can now do, because I'm running in developer mode, I chose that dev mode. Out here, we can see the output of what's actually going on as this thing executes. And what I can do is make a change. So let's just, and again, just for speed, just uncomment this one. And what it'll do is print out not only the key of the S3 object, but also the owner of that S3 object. So I do save. So I've just done Command S in my editor. We'll actually see that it's gone off and it's actually just redeploying it. I'm doing nothing. And then if I was to come here within the space of get the right one, within the space of a couple of seconds or so, if I can actually type, of course, what we'll see is that change, it's already there. So it's already now made a change to the application, and it's actually now put another version out there. Because it's Knative, it's actually created a revision as well, and we can see that executing here. So that's a real quick insight into what Camel K is, a real quick demo of how it works and how easy it is to use with Openshift, and how little I need to know about what actually goes on with an Openshift. And I was hoping to waffle enough there to actually see that thing shut down, but it's not going to in the time that I've got. But believe me, within the space of the next few seconds or so, that guy will actually shut down.